Welcome home. We are WNST. Tassel, Baltimore. Baltimore positive. We're a week out on home football. Next week, it's Baltimore v. Washington. But in the meantime, Cincinnati is in the way on Sunday. We're going to be on Friday celebrating birthdays. Luke had a really crappy birthday. The Orioles were eliminated on his birthday. My birthday's next weekend. I don't know how it's going to go. It's the day after Sammy Hagar and the day before Jim Palmer. So it's usually a really good birthday. On the 11th of October, we will be at Pizza John's. I'll have Raven scratch offs to give away. Meatball sub, cold cut, pepperoni pizza. I'm trying to talk them into doing a new kind of pizza called a Dundalk Venezuelan pizza, which would be the Hawaiian pizza with pepperoni. Because that's my favorite pizza, and it's not on their menu. They have Hawaiian. My wife ordered Hawaiian. No pepperoni, no bueno. Got to have pepperoni, a little crunchies on there. So next Friday, we'll do that for Luke. We'll also have a crab cake. It is the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi Care. They power Luke up, get him back and forth. And my friends at Liberty Pure Solutions. I got my half drank bottle of water, 800 clean water. They're doing the Oyster Tour. The Oyster Tour is going to launch this weekend, quite frankly, because I've been too damn busy. I went around 8 oysters every day in September. I have not platformed it all properly for all of our sponsors. Maritime Magic this weekend, lots of baseball. Luke, it could be worse. You could be a Milwaukee Brewers fan, right?
Yeah, boy, how about that? I mean, I'm no New York Mets fan by any means, and as you know, the Phillies are my National League team, more so for my brother-in-law, a nod to my late grandfather who grew up with the Phillies and before the Orioles even came to town. But that Pete Alonso home run, that was one of the cooler examples of, and I don't want, when I say cooler, more distinct, I guess, more striking examples of a crowd that went from 100 to about, okay, however many Mets fans were smattered in that park
Dude, you
because
were
it
not
was,
with me. You were not with me in Denver. But when Ray Lewis said you could hear a rat
yeah,
piss on cotton, I
yeah.
promise you that's how quiet it was in Denver because it was so cold. I mean, it was just so cold that people couldn't even talk to each other after Jones caught the ball and celebrate.
Yeah.
I mean, the celebration, you could hear them celebrating in the stadium because it was that church quiet. You could
Hmm.
hear Ray Rice screaming on the sidelines. And I felt that way about the Mets thing. My wife got torn into that. We're going to get to Bengals and Ravens because that's why we're here. But Thursday night, did yoga, came back, had a little Planet Fitness moment, and we're sitting here, we're like, what are we going to watch? And she's like, well, Thursday night football. I'm like, no. There's like real baseball going on. And we put it on, and it was great drama. I mean,
Hmm.
for what we've been through around here, and you've written the Requiem for the Orioles, I've written a letter to David Rubenstein. My Katie Griggs letter is coming. We'll see what they're going to do. You were at the Elias press conference. You were at the Brandon Hyde press conference. But my God, dude, have we said the R word this week? I mean, is it like we haven't talked Ravens? It's like they didn't exist Tuesday, Wednesday. They're going to exist Sunday at 1 o'clock, and I think the fold will come back to 2-2. And hey, Joe Burrow's in the way, right?
Yeah, and Joe Burrow and the Bengals are 1-3. So there's no shortage of urgency on their end. I mean, this is a Bengals team that, okay, to beat Carolina last week. Have they really been all that impressive? I mean, we saw them on Monday Night Football. Jaden Daniels, the kid in Washington, chucked the ball all over the field against them. And boy, by the way, that's a little more of an intriguing matchup, within the week to follow. But it's an AFC North game. This has become the rivalry in the division in recent years. The Steelers have, in very strange ways, beaten the Ravens, but that rivalry has next to no juice right now until we see otherwise, right? It's Ravens Bengals. That's what it's been the last few years. Unfortunately, it's often taken place with either Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow injured. So it's always, you always take a moment to be grateful that both are healthy and upright in terms of just entertainment value. But this is a big football game. This is the first division game of the season. The Ravens, we talked a lot about the 0-2 start. The last 2 weeks, they've looked like the best team in the NFL. If we're going to call a spade, when you look at what they did against Buffalo, and even with it getting dicey late, I mean, they still went to Dallas and did what they did to the Cowboys for the first 50 minutes of that ball game. So, yeah, the Ravens are trending up. The Bengals would fancy themselves thinking that they're trending up after an 0-3 start, but I mean, my goodness, this is a big game for both teams. I mean, I think for the Ravens, it's not the end of the world if you drop this one, but for Cincinnati, you drop to 1-4. I mean, what are you? Where are you going to go from there? I mean, that's not an easy thing to
At
navigate,
home, especially. You lose a home game
Right,
like that. Yeah.
exactly. And that's the thing. They've lost some of these games at home, even some games against teams, way worse, than talking about a division rival.
Well, if they're a
So,
contender, they beat the Ravens on Sunday, and the Ravens are 2-3, and then we got a whole different meeting on Monday. But it's a great game. I mean, and I think we knew that when we sort of set it up. If everybody's healthy, that we don't take Pittsburgh seriously yet, and Cleveland. I mean, with the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh, at least, that this was always going to be that game. And I had wondered aloud. Are they 2-2 when they get there? Are they 3-1? Are they 4-0? I mean, I'm talking about the Ravens now. I mean, the Ravens are a tippy toe and a burp against the Raiders away from being 4. I mean, they've been good enough to win. They haven't gone out there and really laid a turd in any way. The Bengals have laid some turds, and
mhm.
this better not be one for the Bengals, because if this is their turd, their season's over, kind of, sort of, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to say the season's over, but in terms of trying to be one of those teams that's jockeying for, first of all, winning the division and what that means if you lose a game in hand at home against your biggest rival, the team that you think is going to be the biggest threat to the division and wanting to win the division, uh, they're kind of in scramble mode just to put themselves in the wild card race. I mean, look, I'm not so sure the AFC is great this year. If you really look at it, I think some teams that maybe had high expectations for haven't really lived up to it yet. I mean, even a team like Houston, who a lot of people were so high on, the eyeball test hasn't necessarily looked what you thought it would, even if the record's okay. So this is still, especially with Kansas City. I mean, beyond just the default Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. And that's the massive caveat, right? We know that. The Ravens learned that. The Bengals have learned that in the past. The Bengals have edged them, although that was 3 years ago at this point in time. But even Kansas City with their injuries and Rashee Rice on IR and Isaiah Pacheco on IR and Hollywood Brown on IR. I mean, they're more vulnerable group, at least in terms of the regular season, as we saw last year. So, I mean, this is a major game for both teams, but I think really more so for the Bengals. I think the Ravens on paper have been the better team. I think statistically, when you kind of look at it beyond just saying, okay, well, they're 2-2 and the Bengals are 1-3, that's not that much better. But I think if you look at them across the board, roster wise, performance wise, the Ravens have been the better team. But this is a Cincinnati team that's still very talented. They have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both on the field. Higgins had missed the first couple games. Chase's
They've
contract
also had
status
turmoil,
was.
right? I mean, the
Well,
turmoil
I was just getting
has
into
been
that, right?
more of a story for them as much as the losing, the turmoil. And that's something that, we go into the Orioles off season is who's happy, who's getting a contract, what do they need to do, and all of that. I mean, the Bengals are still in the offseason to some degree in that way, right? Like in a bad way, and they're notoriously cheap. And they've already paid the quarterback, which they didn't really want to do with Carson Palmer or Andy Dalton or any of the other guys they've had, right? This is like a different thing for them to, and also the relationship between the quarterback and the wide receiver, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems fine. I mean, I don't think that's been a problem at
But
all.
breaking up
But
that band, I'm saying we'll get a
oh
different
yeah,
wide
yeah.
receiver.
Well, sure, and that's why I think there's this urgency because T. Higgins is playing on the franchise tag and definitely feels out the door after the year. And Jamar Chase, I mean, they haven't gotten a deal done yet. Now, I would think they probably will, but again, to your point, that causes drama. That causes a distraction. I mean, this is a team that dealt with all kinds of distractions. Oh yeah, their quarterback's coming back from wrist surgery, which is not something you want a quarterback, their throwing hand, to be dealing with that. So I, maybe we shouldn't be shocked by this start that they've had, but when you look at the losses, I mean, New England, Washington, and we're talking about those games at being at home. So
They thought they were
it's
3-1 when the
very,
fan base looked at it. They're like, we'll beat those teams the way we thought we were going to beat the Raiders.
yeah. So I mean, it's been a very odd start for them. I mean, they haven't been blown out. I mean, they were like the Ravens. They had a chance to win in Kansas City, right? So they have things that they can take as positives. But I mean, you're 1-3. The Ravens are coming to town. If you lose, you're going to 1-4. So that's where I think the Ravens obviously they're up for this. Talked to Roquan Smith at his locker on Thursday. Roquan had more of a spring in his step, more of a twinkle in his eye than he's had all year. And you know why? Because he loves playing the Bengals. I mean, we saw that from the moment he arrived. I think the numbers would even bear it out that some of those big games that Cincinnati had offensively against this defense have kind of gone away since Roquan arrived. And I don't think it's solely because of him in terms of him as a player, but I do think maybe mentality, mindset, aura, all those different things that for whatever reason felt like it was lacking against the Bengals, maybe 3 years ago, let's say. And obviously the quarterback not being on the field played a massive part of a couple of those losses. But no, I think with Smith now leading this defense, they've been more physical with Cincinnati. They've beaten them up. Mike McDonald had kind of perfected how to slow them down. So we'll see if Zach Orr can carry that over. I mean, that Zach Orr's defense looked great against Josh Allen last Sunday night, but this is a new challenge, a new week. So I think that's where this is interesting. And I mean, it's a division game. I think you can tell from my tone, I'm picking the Ravens to win this week. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it or try to put drama in it, but it's a division game and you've got to come ready to play. And I think for Cincinnati, the big question is going to be, do you stack the box to try to stop the run? But if you do, are you going to handle Zay Flowers? Are you going to handle Mark Andrews, who, feels 3 weeks overdue for a breakout? I don't think Mark Andrews is washed up, but went back-to-back weeks without a catch. I mean, that's crazy when you really think about it in terms of kind of what that looks like. But at some point in time, and you and I argued about this a little bit playfully in the aftermath of the Buffalo game, teams are going to start stacking the box because what? You're just going to let the Ravens run for 300 yards against you every week? At some point, teams are going to try to adjust. And that's when I think the Ravens absolutely will be ready to throw the football then. And I think teams will struggle with that because that's how it's worked. That's how it's worked for certainly going back to 19 and 20 and 21. It'll be interesting. I mean, it's always interesting. It's a division game. These teams don't like each other. This is as close as we get to what Ravens Steelers was 15 years ago in the modern NFL. I mean, everyone's too nice in this day and age, right? There's too much player turnover from team to team. I mean, Geno Stone's on the Cincinnati side now, for example. But these teams definitely, there's a stronger disdain here than what in recent years has become mutual respect between Baltimore and Pittsburgh on the field.
Well, Burrow's cocky, right? Burrow rubs guys the wrong way, right?
I don't even know if it's so much Burrow. I don't think the Ravens players dislike Burrow. But there have been plenty of other guys on their offense and defense who have talked, right? I mean, one thing that's kind of been almost laughable about the Bengals the last couple of years is how much they've puffed their chest out because they made it to a Super Bowl. They didn't even win that Super Bowl, but they puffed out their chest about it. And look, I mean, if that gets you going, gets you ready to play, that's fine. But I don't think it's Burrow as much. I think Chase has talked. Some of their guys on defense have talked, not specifically this week, but just over the last couple years at different times. So that these teams don't like each other. And Roquan Smith had said some things that if it was the opposition saying that about your team, that I'm sure the Ravens would have taken some exception to. But it's fun. I like that. It's okay to have some bulletin board material on either side, right? I mean, it makes it more fun for guys like you and me talking about it.
Where were you in 2001?
We'll see how this plays out.
First Ravens Super Bowl year.
The way the
How
Ravens
old were you?
You
were 19, 20, like that? You were young, right? Oh, one. The Shannon Sharpe
the
era.
Super Bowl year, I was Super Bowl year. I was 17.
17. Okay. So I was a reporter then, a real reporter,
17,
like you.
18.
And I remember Shannon Sharpe's locker in the new stadium was over toward the coaches. It was like the last locker by the coaches is where Shannon was on game day. And I remember being there, at the locker when he talked about old plexiglass. And, every time I see Shannon Sharpe, I think of him calling him old plexiglass. And I'm thinking, and all the Terrell Suggs, professional wrestling, hype videos that went with this 20 years ago. I would say that this would be that week, right? Like the Ravens don't get nearly as up to play Washington as maybe you and I and T-Bone do, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like I said, this has become the new Ravens Steelers for the time being. I'm not saying that Ravens Steelers will never heat up again. That's a legacy rivalry at this point. That's I think, especially for younger people, they view Ravens Steelers in the same way that you grew up viewing Packers Bears or Dallas Washington or I mean, for me, when I was growing up in the early to mid 90s, it was 49ers Cowboys, right? I mean, so you have some of these legacy rivalries that are helped when they're in division, but I mean, Ravens Steelers has been a little bit on the colder side, despite the fact that the Steelers have actually won so many of those in recent years. But it's just been a weird dynamic. Whereas this has been, it's got that little bit of a nasty edge to it. I don't know if we're ever going back to the days of Joey Porter going after Ray Lewis on the bus and the craziness of 20 years ago. I don't think that's happening again. But this is at least you can tell these teams don't like each other. And like I said, talking to Roquan Smith at his locker on Thursday afternoon, that's as energetic, and Roquan's always good with the media. Let me be clear about that. But that's as energetic as he's been doing a stand around interview all season. And it's because they're playing the Bengals. I mean, you could just tell he flat out said they don't like us, we don't like them. But he said, hey, that's fun. That makes it fun. You know, it's a rivalry. So, I mean, we're going to see the Ravens the last couple weeks. Like I said, they look like one of the best teams in football since the last 2 weeks. The Bengals, they finally got a win. It's not like they were that they were blown out in their first couple losses, but I mean, you start 0-3. I mean, you're questioning everything. I don't think they have a very good defense. They need to prove themselves otherwise on that. And it's going to start with not letting Derrick Henry and Lamar run all over them. But if you do that, what are you doing? What are you conceding from a pass defense standpoint? And how do the Ravens take advantage of that? It's the ultimate cat and mouse game, and it always has been. That's not a new point, but it's more magnified when you have Derrick Henry rolling the way that you have the last couple weeks, and more specifically, your offensive line is starting to really come together. I'm going to be interested to see Voorhees has been limited this week, so is he back in there, or do they say, hey, Rosengarten at right tackle and McCary at left guard? That seemed to work pretty darn well against the Bills. Let's see that for another week. I mean, I don't think they're married to a specific starting five. I think they certainly want Rosengarten in there, as the season goes on. He's your second round pick at right tackle, but those guys they've gotten rolling, and let's see if they can continue it. I mean, it's a Bengals team that knows them very well. Both the division rivalry games, you always know your opponent really well, but I think the Bengals better be ready because I think Buffalo had a mindset of, yeah, we play too high. Yeah, they run the ball really well. Yeah, we typically only keep six in the box, but we like what we do. We're really disciplined in what we do. And then we saw how that turned out on the first play of the game. So I think Cincinnati, it'll be interesting. Again, I'm waiting for teams to just start really loading up the box, and then we see play action and the passing game really start to do more from a volume standpoint. And I don't mean 50 times. Let's be clear about that. I've never said that, despite how you and I will kind of jab back and forth about, passing game versus the ground attack. But teams are going to start adjusting. But I think the Ravens are going to be ready because they have the talent to be a very capable passing game. And they showed that last year. They just haven't had to really rely on it the last couple of weeks because, well, when you run for 250 or almost 300 yards, well, yeah, keep doing that. I'm not going to sit here and argue against that.
Well, whatever that bet you would make, the exotic would say, would they pass on first down right away and, keep them honest or whatever? You get Derrick Henry, run the ball and see if they can, run it until they stop it. I mean, I think that was the whole idea, especially early in the season with all this. Luke Jones is here. He's Baltimore Luke. He's powered up by our friends at Royal Farms as well as Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. He will be monitoring all things Sunday. I'd love to say that we would be in New York. Man, I had reservations at Peter Luger's for us. I was all, nice little table. I was all ready for 3 days in New York, and instead it's the Royals going to New York. So we are baseball less around here, but still writing about baseball. And, I guess that'll go out of focus a little bit as we sit here and watch the rest of these teams play, and it'll get back to purple focus. One thing I'd like to say as we get into our birthday week here, and we're quarter of the way through the season, right? I mean, a quarter of the way through this game will be a quarter of the way through the season, right? Injuries and good health. Now, I know if Harbaugh's listening, you jinxed us, man. You're talking about injuries. We haven't had a lot of them. They've been healthy. And look, I want to say if they're healthy, they should be 4-0 instead of 2-2. We've watched the games, right? We've watched the penalties. All of that. The passing game not happening yet. I mean, you say it doesn't. I'd say let's see it work. You'll say, well, it'll work. It always works. Well, let's see it work. Let's see them win a game throwing the football. I don't think they need to. I think they can win 12, 13 games without having to throw. And that would be my goal on the road. My goal wouldn't be to go to Cincinnati and throw. My goal would be to run some more, throw if you need to. And you look up and it's 31-10 in the third quarter. And where's Josh Johnson? You know what I mean? So I would have no problem with that sort of attack. But the health of the team in general, that you and I have spent longer stretches, especially later in years, and we are early in the year, so good luck is with us, that even with an injury, they could put McCary in. They may have upgraded it by having McCary. McCary's probably the better player at this point, right? In either way. And it's sort of like, well, we'll leave him on the bench. Let's leave our best hitter on the bench to pinch hit. McCary's probably better than either one of these guys from knowing the offense, all of that. But the upside of the other guys, got to get him to play. They're young. We got to get him to play. He's a sixth guy. He's a backup. Sure, nice having him when you have a problem. And I would also say, in your mind, is anybody else dinged beyond the point where, like, we're worried about? Ronnie Stanley looks healthy, for crying out loud. You know what I mean? The guys that we always worry about have looked pretty healthy.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm glad you brought up Ronnie Stanley. We haven't given him enough oxygen in terms of just how good he's been. Now, look, it's week 4. To your point, I mean, you knock on wood, you say a little prayer, you keep your fingers crossed that it continues. But this is as healthy, as good as Ronnie Stanley's looked in years. I mean, it is, and of course, he's one player rolling into his knee or his ankle away from that same conversation coming back. And look, that applies to everyone, right? I mean, everyone gets hurt at some point in time. That's why I always kind of joke and I say the flippant, my descriptor that someone's durable until they're not anymore, but because that's just how this game works. But he's put in the work. He was there. I mean, even when you and I were talking about OTAs and trying to figure out if anything matters, and it usually doesn't, but Ronnie Stanley was there throughout the spring. He practiced every day over the summer. I mean, that was not what we were seeing in previous years. And I don't say that as a knock on him. It was just they very much had to give him days off and they really had to manage things. And it wasn't really a case where they even wanted him practicing 3 days in a row. So there was so much of that going on. Whereas this offseason, they cut his pay, right? They voided the final year of his contract, making this a contract year for him. And they said, look, Ronnie, you got to go out and prove it. And you've got to try to get your body right as much as you can. And no one's blaming you for that. We all know the catastrophic ankle injury that you had 4 years ago, but you're also being compensated at a level where we can't continue to go down this road if you're not going to be anywhere close to the player you were then. And he was the first to admit. He talked about this in the spring, how it killed him last year to play at the level that he did, which just wasn't very good. And he was hurt and he was trying to play through it, and it was admirable, but it wasn't getting the job done to the degree that the Ravens needed at that price point. So he's come in, and would I say he's playing at the level he did in 2019? That might, maybe not quite, but he's been pretty darn close to that. He's been good. He has absolutely been above average as far as how he's played. And there have not been that many points over the last 4 years, even for a 2 or 3 or 4 game stretch, where you would say that. So you hope that it continues for his sake, for his career's sake, and certainly for the 2024 Ravens sake. You would love to be in a position at the end of the year with him where you're saying, all right, he's now going to be a free agent. What do we do here? Now, it's not going to be another $100 million contract, of course. That ship has certainly sailed, and he's 30 years old now anyway. But do you look at it and say, you know what? We'll give you a 3-year deal at something that's still going to make you, I don't know, a top 12 left tackle in the league. I don't know. I mean, again, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but as it pertains to where the football team is in early October, knowing that they had these questions elsewhere on the offensive line, it's been nice to have Ronnie Stanley join Tyler Linderbaum as right? I mean, he's been someone that we haven't talked a whole lot about, and that's that's kind of a deliberate thing. That's a good thing, right? It's like whenever you talk about, you're not talking about your offensive line. That usually means that it's doing a really nice job. It's like an umpire in baseball, although that's become a bad analogy because now with the strike box, we're critiquing every single pitch, even if it's really not that bad. So, but Ronnie Stanley's done a good job. And you mentioned Patrick McCary. I don't think McCary was necessarily great at left guard last week individually, but as a unit, it worked. And he knows his assignment. You can depend on him on any of those five spots if you're in need. You're right. The young guys, yes, they have more upside. And I do think Roger Rosengarten might be better than McCary in certain ways right now, but I certainly think he's going to be better than McCary across the board long term, or at least that's the vision when you draft someone in the
Well, he's
second
also got a
round.
body
So
that's a right tackle body in Roser. I mean,
right.
McCary's got really a center guard kind of body, like literally. I mean, putting him at tackles a stretch, I think.
You know what? I don't know. I almost think the opposite, just in terms of I mean, McCary's he's not a gigantic guy. So, you typically think, although the Ravens have been trying to trend more athletic, maybe slightly lighter guys anyway, although Daniel Faalele completely breaks that mold. So who the heck knows? I mean, that was kind of the perception going into the offseason and them making this. But with McCary, I think the big question, and I just know this over the years, having talked to coaches and different people in the organization, they've always preferred trying to keep him outside at tackle because they felt that he could hold up physically better, and not just because he's not gigantic like a guard, but he has a little bit of a back issue that he has to manage. It's just something that I don't know if it's chronic. It certainly hasn't cost them many games over the years, but it's something that they feel it's kind of why they like keeping him in that sixth man role in the perfect world, because it does save some wear and tear on him over the course of a season. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. I mean, I think they want to get Voorhees back out there, but if he's not 100%, he hasn't played at a level where you're going to say, oh yeah, we'll send you out there at 80%. I mean, it's not Marshall Yanda, who can play through an injury like Marshall would do for so many times over the years. But but McCary, I mean, it was amazing on Sunday night. That marked the first start he had at left guard, and that completed the set for him. He started an NFL game at all five offensive line positions. I mean, that's really impressive. I mean, that almost sounds like something you would have expected to hear back in like 1965, right? I mean, where I mean, you even had two-way players at times, if you go far enough back in NFL history. But he's just versatile. He's a valuable piece. He knows what he's going to do. I mean, even if he's not going to be 100% perfect with his win rate, blocking, and all that, he generally knows it. He's going to know his assignment. He knows who to block, right? He might not always execute it perfectly, but you need players like that. We talk about that a lot in baseball, where you have a super utility guy who has the ability. I mean, Jordan Westburg could play legitimate defense at second base and third base, can play shortstop in a pinch. I mean, you don't want him there, really, obviously.
I think you could put him in left field and he could field balls. I mean, he's a ball player. Right?
Yeah, he probably could do
BJ
that
Surhoff.
And not kill you.
He might be a left fielder when he's 31 years old, because that might be where he has to go play.
Maybe.
Right?
Who knows? Maybe. But the point is, you like having guys that can do that, because stuff's going to happen. Guys are going to get hurt, and you need some versatility. So it's nice to be versatile. It's really nice to be versatile and to actually have some ability, and not just say, hey, I can line up there. So we spent a lot of time talking about this O-line, and I'm not ready to sit here and say that the O-line is fixed or 100% as good as it can possibly be. I think there's still going to be challenges along the way. I still think there are questions in terms of, as you get deeper into the season, other teams get familiar with your personnel and other ways they might try to exploit, but it certainly feels and looks better than it did a few weeks ago. And that's kind of, that was kind of the vision here. As I said to you going into week one, and not that it played out this way exactly, because they had their issues the first couple of weeks, no question. But I said to you at the time, if this group can look somewhere close in the neighborhood of average at the beginning of the year, I'll feel better about their chances of being an above average, rock solid offensive line as the year goes on. And, I'm not ready to say that just yet, that it's all above average and all is great or anything like that, but I feel better about it. And I mean, look no further than Derrick Henry's first play against the Bills, 87 yards. He wasn't touched. I mean, I love Derrick Henry and he breaks tackles and stiff arms and all that. Like, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't touched on that play.
How did
So
the
it
Bills get
speaks
off
to
the
how
bus and
well it was
allow that to
blocked up at
happen?
the line
Right,
of
literally,
scrimmage.
right? Yeah. How did the
Yeah,
Bills
exactly,
prepare all
exactly.
week
So
for him and not touch him? Right.
right, so again, yeah, Derrick Henry, yes, Lamar Jackson, no question about it. And those guys absolutely are force multipliers in terms of forcing a defense to account for you on every single play. But if your offensive line goes out there and gets a hat on a hat for everyone in that general vicinity of where you're running the ball, and you block the backside up even, then man, that's saying something. So hey, I mean that's the challenge for this Bengals front. I mean we haven't mentioned his name, Trey Hendrickson against Ronnie Stanley. I mean that's a key matchup. But this Bengals front, they had some attrition, in terms of guys leaving, and Sam Hubbard, through the first few weeks of the season was absolutely awful. Their linebackers have been okay, maybe a little better than I thought. I mean, I'm not big on their linebackers, but I think it's still a defense that is trying to find its way a little bit. They've lost some really good players over the last 3, 4 years, going back to Jesse Bates, who made a big play in that Thursday night game, for Atlanta. That the Bengals have been chasing that. That's why they brought back Von Bell. They're hoping that Geno Stone can give them better play at safety, because that was something that really hurt them last year. I mean, they were bad at safety last year. So, it's Ravens Bengals. I'm looking forward to it. To your point, the Ravens were an afterthought this week until now. It's Baltimore's only hope again, right? Because the Orioles won't play again until late March. So, as much as the disappointment of the Orioles, will linger, I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But I think this is for the Ravens to have the performance they did against the Bills on Sunday night. It left everyone feeling really good, and then people that are baseball fans in town forgot about the Ravens, focused on the Orioles. Well, that ended really quickly, and now it's back to the Ravens. And hey, you went on the road, you improved to 3-2. That 0-2 start is absolutely 100% in the rearview mirror at that point in time. And then you look at the schedule over the next month on paper and say, hey, there's quite an opportunity here to put yourself in position where you could be 6-2 a month from now and really be feeling very good about not just being in the playoffs or winning the division, but hey, where's Kansas City at that point in time, right? And where's Buffalo at that point in time? Where's Houston at that point in time in terms of the AFC hierarchy and playoff positioning and all that? But it starts with Sunday, and it starts with beating your division rival in the first of two meetings. And as we said earlier in our segment, it's a Bengals team that if they're not desperate, they should be, because I mean, you fought a 1-4 and you're 0-1 against the Ravens in the division. I mean, that's to your point. I don't think your season's done, but that is an uphill climb the rest of the way to try to climb out of that.
Well, I mean, the Ravens are 2.5 point favorite on the road, right? So, like, just from the face of it, we haven't gone in there many times a favorite because they've been perceived to be pretty good. Even back when Marvin was there, they beat us regularly there. I left that stadium driving to Louisville plenty of times, having lost, talking to you and saying, "Hey, Andy Dalton, who's the redheaded kid? Who's this kid?" Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore. Luke. Turns out I'm the redheaded stepchild of sports media here, but we're going to have requiems for the Orioles. If you read my David Rubenstein letter, Luke, it was in the locker room. We are going to press some Orioles issues here in the coming weeks to see if there really are changes, if they're really going to react to 10,000 empty seats at a playoff game that were $10. I mean, weird week, just a weird week all the way around, because I think you and I thought the Orioles could be successful. We prepared for them to be successful. We thought this weekend would be different. I know, Luke, I don't have a crab cake tour other than Pizza John's next Friday because, I wasn't buying green bananas. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey, man, I know how this magic carpet ride happens. I mean, we talked about that Mets Brewers game in the beginning. The Brewers thought they were headed to Philadelphia, right? Or and then things change. So, from a football perspective, good health. The one thing I was being interruptive, which I always am with you, but Ronnie Stanley, started to think about this a little bit as far as talent for the Ravens
Mm-hmm.
and what DeCosta has put together and when in the offseason. how many Hall of Fame talents do the Ravens have? Because for me, Ronnie Stanley was a Hall of Fame talent first 2, 3 years, gave him the money. Marlon Humphrey, much like Chris McAllister, I thought Chris McAllister was a Hall of Fame talent, right? Getting there and being healthy enough and staying the way you need to stay. Mark Andrews, could be Travis Kelce if he were in the right system. I mean, Mark Andrews, when it's all over with, is going to say, I played in an offense where we just didn't pass the ball. I mean, we just didn't like producing numbers is easier when you hit at Coors Field. It's a lot harder when you pitch at Coors Field. So I mean, but Roquan's a Hall of Fame talent, right? Like, I mean, Matabike. I'm not talking about guys that have come into their own, or even Zay Flowers or any. I'm not going to talk about any of those guys. Lamar's going to the Hall of Fame, I guess, right? I mean, I think
he's going to. I mean, barring something that changes his trajectory so dramatically, and I'll say if and when he wins a Super Bowl, then he could retire at that moment and probably go to the Hall of Fame. But his trajectory, barring something that unforeseen that no one wants to see, right? I mean, a bad injury, something like that. I mean, it's.
If he doesn't win a Super Bowl, he's going to have a hell of an argument one way or another, because that's sort of that would be something that wouldn't get him in. He's got a lot of football. I mean, I'm with you. Lamar's going to the Hall of Fame. I'll be back in the media then, and I'll be the voter, and I'll have to make his presentation.
There you go. There you go.
So there you go. I'll be seen as the sage, respected guy who never lied about things like running backs punching their wives in elevators and just things like that. So, but I'll say this. Lamar, Derrick Henry, I thought Ronnie Stanley had Hall of Fame talent. I think Tyler Linderbaum probably has Hall of Fame talent at that position based on what I've seen. I would say Roquan Smith is a Hall of Fame talent. I would say Marlon Humphrey could be. You're in love with Kyle Hamilton, and I am. It's early. It's like saying Gunner's going to the Hall of Fame now. Stop.
But wait a second. If you're saying Hall of Fame talent, I mean, some of the names you just named are guys that are not even going to be they're going to be an afterthought. They're not going to be mentioned as a Hall of Famer. But if you're saying talent, Kyle Hamilton absolutely is a Hall of Fame talent. If that's what we're talking about.
He is where Ronnie Stanley and Marlon were in year 2 or 3, and saying,
sure,
ooh, really good player. You know where we are with Roquan now, a year or 2 more, saying, really good player. I don't know. You're linebacker. How long do you hold up? Do you get a ring? Do you play? Do you win playoff games, or do you lose them? Do you make the playoffs? Are you here long term? Are you going to stay healthy, right? Like, that's the whole thing about even Lamar and everybody else, to stack things. Henry's on the other end of that now, where I think he might be in his. But this is when these guys get off the bus and you're in Cincinnati, I don't know how many Hall of Fame talents they have. I mean, Joe Burrow's a Hall of Fame talent, but Hendrickson maybe, that's a tough position.
Jamar Chase, I mean, talent-wise, absolutely.
Fair enough.
Absolutely talent-wise.
But it's really hard, as we found out with the baseball team, to have those kinds of players in your program. And on the football side, it's very rare. And Eric's been very good at drafting really good players. And there's always a turd or two. And there's always a Perryman or a Bateman or a guy that gets hurt, or a Patrick Queen that needs more help, or even a CJ Mosley, who's a really good player, still a really good player, that just exits, right? But this group here this is a hell of a talented team, and I think that's one of the reasons 2.5-point favorite on the road, even though they scuffled a little bit against the division rival and all that. I mean, the perception of the Ravens, and you said 6-2, and I'm like, well, if they're 6-2, they're going to win 6 in a row. Well, they're good enough to do that, but then they have to go out and do it.
Right. I mean, and again, that's why I've been stressing, even though I said, yes, I'm picking the Ravens to win, it's a division game. I mean, if we're talking on Monday morning about the Bengals edging them out 24-20, I'm not going to sit here and be shocked about it. People will be disappointed because it'll be like, my goodness, the Ravens couldn't pick everyone's spirits up after what happened with the Orioles.
And they're under 500. And here comes Jaden Daniels, right?
Yeah. But everything you just laid out, because, we talked about this a lot in the offseason. We talked about this a lot in the spring and summer. Would it be fair to say that I was higher on this team than you were going into the season? I think so, right? Overall, I'm not saying you were down on them, but I feel like I was higher on them than you were overall. That doesn't mean I was saying that they're going to win the Super Bowl. Like, no questions asked. They're just going to go 16-1 or anything like that.
The reason I haven't been high on them is they want to have a running game, and I was worried about the offensive line. And I still would say from a health standpoint, from a depth standpoint, it's only the quarter pole. I'm
Sure.
not worried about Derrick Henry being old and fat and slow and beaten up in January. I mean, maybe he will be, but that
I
was
am if
never
he,
my concern. That was always your concern of tread on the tire. Hey, you're going to run in January? I'll take my chances with Derrick Henry over Anthony Mitchell's kid or over J.K. Dobbins or anybody in the Hall of. I mean, I wouldn't want Adrian Peterson back now, but I don't think I'm good with whatever Derrick Henry is, whatever that bus I saw last week, that locomotive. I'll take my chances with his health in January before I would take it with Lamar right now.
okay. I mean, I don't know why you brought up Lamar, but
Well, Lamar
I
better be
think,
healthy or they can't win in
well,
January.
yeah, I mean, that's what I was just going to say. Lamar is the one player that if he gets hurt, your season's over. I mean, okay, you can give the ball to Derrick Henry 40 times every game if you want. The Tennessee Titans never won a Super Bowl doing it that way. They never got to a Super Bowl doing it that way.
They never had Lamar Jackson.
Well, I was saying if Lamar gets under that scenario, my one little pushback to that would be Derrick Henry's averaging 20 carries a game. I am concerned about him holding up if he's going to carry 300 plus times over the course of the season. Not that
How
not that
many
I mean
carries
he's
does Lamar had? Lamar had a bunch for week one. Lamar's got a lot of carries, right?
Lamar doesn't have 2,000 rushing attempts under his belt in his career. That's all I would say about that. But I want to go back to the point that you were making about all these players. The reason why I was higher on this football team in terms of figuring this all out, figuring out the offensive line, transitioning from Mike McDonald to Zach Orr, the depth that they did lose. And look, the injuries, and you made up a good point, and that goes with this. They don't have quite as much depth at certain positions on the field that they did last year. So that certainly is something that's a factor if some injuries pop up. But the reason why I still felt really good about this team, even though I did not feel good about the offensive line really at all, was because of what you just said. They have, I don't even know if I like saying Hall of Fame talent, because what does that really mean? Part of being a Hall of Famer is that you have to do it for a really long time. And that's such the challenge in this game, in this violent, physically brutal game to do it for 10 plus years at an elite level to the degree that people say you're worthy of a gold jacket. But they do have premium elite talent all over the football field when you look at, and I will throw Justin Matabike into that, at least that descriptor
And I'll throw
for
Mark Andrews into that, and he ain't
for
caught a
your
pass in
for
three
your
weeks.
for
All
your,
right.
well, and we know, but assuming Mark Andrews isn't done or washed or anything like that, and I still don't think he is. I just think this has just been a very odd few weeks in terms of matchups and what the Ravens do well and what other teams don't do well. That's kind of led to that, contributed to that anyway.
His
But
backup's got a radio show, so yeah,
but on defense, you have Matabike on your defensive line. Let's throw Van Noy in there right now. I mean, he was just named Defensive Player of the Month. I mean, I don't know how he's doing it at age 33 to the degree that he is, and we'll see how he holds up over the course of the full year. But he's been terrific. Always played well. I'm not calling him elite, but he's trending in the right direction. Uh, you have Roquan Smith off ball linebacker, and then in the secondary you have Kyle Hamilton. And hey, you said it, not me. But I agree. Marlon Humphrey's playing at a high level to start this year, higher than we've seen at least the last 2 years, let's say. So you look at that on defense, even with Zach Orr, even with Jadeveon Clowney moving on, and other depth pieces moving on, like Geno Stone, who we're going to see in Cincinnati on Sunday. And offensively, you have Tyler Linderbaum. You have a better version of Ronnie Stanley, who maybe isn't peak 2019 Ronnie Stanley, but he's looked closer to that than the guy that we had kind of seen the last 2 or 3 years. So that's good to see. You obviously have one of the 2 or 3 best quarterbacks in football and a two-time MVP at that position. You have Derrick Henry. You have Mark Andrews, who I'm still going to trust the body of work of the last 5 years for what kind of player he's been. Zay Flowers had a really good rookie year, and I still think before it's all said and done, he's going to do some really good things for this team this year when teams force them to throw, which is coming at some point in time. I mean, at some point in time, if Derrick Henry continues to run like this, you're going to have to put 8 in the box, and at that point, then Lamar will chuck it over their heads. So, I mean, there's talent everywhere, and that doesn't mean that it's perfect. That doesn't mean that they still don't have work to do. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges ahead. That doesn't mean there won't be injuries ahead. It's a long, long season. Just like anyone that was ready to bury them at 0-2, they're 2-2 now. That doesn't mean that they're winning the Super Bowl either, right? I mean, Kyle Hamilton said that after Sunday night's game. He said, "This is a nice statement, sure, but we didn't win a Super Bowl tonight," and he's right. So
Well,
the
Marlon
next
Humphrey's
challenge,
been dogged by the Bayou Barbie and Lamar Jackson on film all this week, which really speaks to what kind of guy Marlon Humphrey is. By the way, Chad Steele banning me. That's the one thing I'm like, dude, keep me away from Marlon Humphrey. It's a good. I don't need to spend any time with Marlon Humphrey. So God bless you and everybody else that deals with that cat. But let him go play this week and count his money. But it's a big game, dude. And Luke Jones will be covering it. He's Baltimore Luke. The Ravens are a favorite. We're going to get back after it Monday. If anybody gets hurt, it was my fault for talking about injuries this week. We all know that, right? Luke is at Baltimore Luke. He can be found at Luke at WNST.net. I am a very, very available individual as well. I swear this oyster tour is going to get out of Baltimore positive. I've swallowed a lot of oysters this month. I thought we were going to be swallowing some Peter Lugers up in New York this week, and I was going to take you for my favorite Korean ice, and I was going to take you down to Chinatown for some dumplings and Kenny's Castaways, and alas, we're going to watch football on the telly from Ohio. Ravens and the Bengals on Sunday afternoon. Luke will have it monitored. We'll be out on Twitter, Facebook, X, whatever you call all of that stuff. And we'll be back after it on Monday morning doing what we do. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.